So everyone is talking about this radical act of comedy that South Park just pulled off this week in their season 27 opener. And I definitely want to explore that because I do think this is a radical act of comedy. And it is such a giant middle finger to Trump, but it's not only a giant middle finger to Trump. It is far more thoughtful than I think even people are giving great credit for. They're focusing on the big parts of this episode, and I think they've been able to smartly break down the hypocrisy that we are seeing within the MAGA movement, that we are seeing from President Trump. And that's what I want to explore. The fact of the act of political satire that the guys from South Park, who are some of the funniest, smartest creators out there, are doing in this season opener, I was just awestruck by. And this is coming from somebody who has watched all 27 seasons of South Park. I haven't missed an episode. I've watched every episode of this show. And I will fully admit, like the past decade or so, I just don't think it's been as funny as it once was. This isn't to say that they're not funny. It's just to say that I don't think they've reached the comedic highs that they have in the past. This week's episode felt like the South Park that I remember growing up with, and where I was like, wow, this is such a giant message that they're putting in this. This is something that they are actively sharpening their knives for, and they want the blood, they want this fight, and they're not going to relinquish. That is where I remember South Park growing up, where I'm like, wow, they are not taking prisoners in this. They are going full guns out blazing in this. And that's kind of the incredible thing of this episode. And I think what is drawing so many people to watching this and talk about it, and for this to kind of feel like a little cultural touchstone in a way that I just don't think South Park has really had that control of the cultural zeitgeist in a while. And so let's kind of talk about what this episode does brilliantly, which we do have to focus on the Donald Trump of it all and the call outs that they do to Donald Trump in this episode. And for anyone who does not know, there are two like key facts of parody that you have to know going into this. One is in 1999, they had this movie, South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, where they had the character of Saddam Hussein, who has the exact same voice and it's the exact same animation style that they now use for Donald Trump. And it is directly saying that they view Donald Trump as the same way that they viewed Saddam Hussein, which is this petty, pathetic dictator who is also just extremely dangerous, violent, and just an insane person all around. That's how they portrayed Saddam Hussein in 1999. That's how they're portraying Donald Trump in 2025. So that in itself, to call him a Middle Eastern dictator is like a huge connotation and a first like act of like, wow, that is like incredibly risque and brave to do on TV, especially as Trump is persecuting his enemies. The other act that I think is also really important to pay attention to is what they do with Donald Trump and how Trump has evolved in South Park itself. So for those who were not watching in 2016 or don't remember those seasons as well, essentially how they dealt with Donald Trump the first time around was having him be this figure portrayed not in the show. There was never a character called Donald Trump. They had this stand-in character, Mr. Garrison, who is the teacher in that show. Basically, he runs for president as a Donald Trump-like figure, including the hair, including the orange face. And the South Park creators have been like very public in this. Like they didn't think Donald Trump was going to win. And then they kind of pigeonholed themselves into like, well, I guess Mr. Garrison is now president in this show and he's representing Donald Trump. So like they didn't always focus a ton on Trump the first 4 years. They definitely had a lot of episodes about it, but like their commentary on it just wasn't necessarily the same that they had done throughout different years. And it just seemed like they just didn't want to touch that subject matter / everyone was talking about it, so what new did they have to voice about it? That's not what's happening anymore. I think the Donald Trump discourse has radically changed over the past 10 years, and this is specifically tied to what happens on January 6th and also to him winning the election in November of 2024. And I think what you're seeing is at one point in 2016, it was cool to be part of the resistance. There was money to be made in the resistance from the studio side. So they were able to lean into their disdain for what Trump was doing. They were able to dive into social issues and like be on this side with them and, you know, project social justice warriors upon themselves and like have that be a part of their brand. That goes away in 2024 when Trump wins. And they're like, well, and they start throwing everything out of the bus. They're like, well, woke stuff is killing TV and all this. And like, we don't want to be accused of woke. So like, the context has drastically changed for South Park, where it's like, okay, well, at one point everyone was talking about it, and now it's kind of like not as talked about anymore. And you see it, like The Boys is a show that comments on Trump very directly, and I made that very clear in my reviews for The Boys season 4, where I'm like, this is a show about Trump, and it has to be understood within that context. South Park is now kind of doing the same thing, and it's even more direct than what The Boys does. Instead of Homelander being the stand-in for Trump, Trump is the stand-in for Trump in this. We have Donald J. Trump in this episode, and it's very clear. And they make no mistakes. Like, this is his face on an animated body, and they go out of their way to attack him in ways that I just, again, haven't seen from South Park in a while. Here's some of the things that Trump does in this episode. One, besides the fact that he often runs around this episode completely naked, and they give him a very small... You know what I'm trying to say. It's very small in this episode, very hard to see. But along with that, they also have him as this insane person who's just yelling and saying that he's going to sue everyone. Does that sound familiar? It's because that's what he does. He's this guy that's constantly bullying people on social media because, again, go look at his social media. That's what he does. And he's in this sexual relationship with Satan, I should say. And Satan's like, this guy's a piece of shit. Like, so much so that Satan's like, hey, like, are you on the Epstein list? Like, there's so much of that. So to get to the point of like Satan's like, hey, this guy's the worst. And there's also like the fact that like in this, like there's military propaganda all over this episode for Donald Trump. Like there's one of him essentially what it looks like having sex with a tank, and the explosion from the tank replicates, well, you know what it replicates. There's also other ones of like Trump, what looks like to be engaged in sexual intercourse with an animal. And there's also like him as a Roman emperor being painted in that fashion. Like they are making it quite clear what they think of him in this episode in a way that South Park has always attacked people in the culture, and they have not shied away from that. But I usually still think there is a level of like what they're willing to joke about and like what they're saying about the people. And maybe they parody a specific aspect of this person or equality, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they hate this person through and through. This was one where you watch and you're like, oh no, they have quite huge disdain for Donald Trump in a way that is just like not a lot of places are able to say that directly, especially with everything going on with CBS, which is a huge talking point of this. Like, South Park was in kind of litigation trying to figure out how they were going to get this deal done with Paramount as the Skydance merger is going on. Paramount ends up giving South Park $1.5 billion for the next 50 episodes, and South Park comes away with this episode, which is just in itself like, wow, like considering everything that Trump has been putting the pressure on Paramount, the fact that he's been basically bullying Paramount through this process, has been taking bribes, has basically said that he won't allow this merger to happen with the FCC until he is satisfied. And then to have South Park come in and be like, well, F you, we don't care. Like, we don't care about your merger. We don't care about any of this. We're going to speak our minds. It's a pretty like radically brave act of like political satire. And again, this episode points out like how brave is it? Like, ultimately they're going to be back next week. Like, it's so funny that the fact of the Cartman character is like trying to kill himself, and it's like, well, next Tuesday, like we're not going to make it to next Tuesday. And like they try to kill themselves, but they also try to kill themselves by an electric car, which is, you know, kind of an apt metaphor of like, oh, we're saying we're in danger, but we're really not in danger. And I think that's the bet they're making. I don't know what that danger is for them. I don't know what it means. I know poking the bear that is Donald Trump has its consequences, as we've been seeing with Colbert, as we're seeing with everything. The fact of how many comedians, late night talk shows hosts are kind of gathering around this, and the fact that South Park is putting their hat in this ring. So much of that is here in this episode, and it is direct commentary of what is going on. One of the smartest moments of this episode, though, that I don't think has gotten quite as much attention is its understanding of Christianity, which everyone now who knows of this episode has seen the end of this episode, which is this PSA, which is supposedly sponsored by Paramount, one of 50 for the next 50 episodes, I guess. It'd be really funny if every week they end with a Trump attack ad like this. But the part of it that I found just so enlightening, and where I'm like, wow, this is great satire of a culture that is just so specific. And I'm like, wow, I haven't seen a lot of people really talk about this, which is the weaponization of Christianity and the use of Christianity to serve as a tool of propaganda to allow Trump and conservatives to essentially get whatever they want across to their voters. And essentially what is happening, and it has been true forever, and it has been true with the rise of evangelical Christianity in America, but also has its roots in Christianity its entire future, is essentially the politicalization of religion to get your way. And of course, religion and politics are always directly tied one way or the other, and even for those who admit that it's not. But essentially what we're seeing in this episode is there's a scene where Trump walks across this MAGA pool party happening at the White House, and there's this song playing in the back, bringing back Christ, bringing back Christ. Like, and then they're like, there's money in Christ, there's money in Christ. And I have the tune completely wrong, but that's the idea. Like, you're in this and you're like, oh, well, he is using Christianity to essentially grift. And it's so true. And it's like something that I've experienced personally. Like, I will fully admit, in college, I was a practicing Christian, going to church every week, participating, doing all of that. I have since largely moved away from the church. I still have some beliefs and some faith and all that. Like, I'm not disavowing that necessarily, but I have had issues with the church and their role in Donald Trump and the inhumane qualities of that, and like what Trump stands for, the hypocrisy of this all, and the fact of like who Jesus Christ is supposed to stand for as a person. Like, this idea that like Jesus Christ is this figure that when you read the Bible, he is a man who cared for the poor, he cared for the sick, he cared for the outcasts, invited those who were needy. He didn't care for the wealthy. He reached out to those who were cast aside by societies like lepers and sex workers. He focuses on love, compassion, inclusivity, advocate of radical forgiveness and nonviolence, compassion over laws, the fact that he would heal on the Sabbath and how that was a big no-no according to the law. And that is like such a direct contrast with everything that Trump and conservative MAGA has done, and really what Republicans have been able to weaponize conservatism to look like in its existence. And for me, that was like a really personal note that this episode is able to hit to and be like, yeah, isn't this so incredibly stupid in how Christianity plays a role, and how Christianity isn't really anything anymore except a tool used for propaganda and Trump, and how he's using it to basically strip people of their dignity and rights. And that is something that I've wrestled with. And it's like I said, it's largely the reason I've moved away from the church completely, is due to stuff like that I was seeing in there. And even in college, I was fairly progressive. So to see that I was having all those issues and like questions myself and what that meant for my faith, and then like moving away from my faith in aspects as it tied to the practices of a church. That's all I'll kind of say on that without getting more personal. But that is to say that I really appreciated this episode talking about that this grifting of Christianity that we've seen. We've seen this from guys like Russell Brand. We've seen this from other guys who just kind of go in there and they're like, oh, we're like saved by Christ. And they're using Christ as like an example to really just trick this conservative movement, who is far more conservative than they are actually of anything closely resembling a religious practice or background. Obviously, I think the South Park guys are more harsh on their religion than I am saying. I think they probably have more disdain for organized religion than I am clearly showing in this video. But again, the idea to tackle this and explore this in this episode, I just found incredibly fascinating. And to explore that, how he and really all dictators have been able to use a religion to justify their doings, and how that is a tool of control often used in dictatorships. We're seeing it now. We've seen it throughout history, and it will continue to be throughout history. So for this episode to address it in this way that they do, ever so briefly, because these scenes aren't necessarily the thing, but having Jesus Christ being a figured being sued by Trump is another point of just like, it's again just capturing this hypocrisy and the insanity of this situation. I thought it was incredibly funny. I thought it was just really smartly handled. And the other aspect that I want to talk about as it relates to this, where I'm like, wow, this is kind of South Park kind of redefining what it is on the fly, is the Eric Cartman character. Who, Eric Cartman, as I've always said, he is one of the guys that just gets put on social media where you'll see people like, they'll share the Kathleen Kennedy clip of Eric Cartman playing Kennedy. And he's like, make her gay and put a chick in it. And people are like, oh yeah, this is just Star Wars strategy. I'm like, guys, it's 27 years of South Park. If you don't know that when the Eric Cartman character does something, that is supposed to be like, oh, it's in the wrong. Cartman isn't a character to be like, oh yeah, he gets it. He's so right for his beliefs. He's quite literally a Nazi psychopath in it. In the show, that is his role. So to see so many people like be like, oh yeah, like we're a part of the joke. I'm like, no, he is the joke and you're the joke. And like I said, it's so much so. And in this episode, it's like really funny how they contextualize it even more so, where Cartman is just depressed because everyone now acts like Cartman. You saw those videos last week from Jubilee that they posted, where it was one far left versus 20 far right, or one progressive versus 20 far right that Jubilee posted that now has like 10 million plus views in a week. And you're like, oh, in that room with Mehdi Hassan is 20 Eric Cartmans. We're now at this point where Eric Cartman is like depressed because he's like, oh, this is what a world of just me's sounds like and looks like. And now it's no more fun to be like, you know, cruel and vindictive and evil and all this. Like, this is just like the norm. Like, if I'm a part of the norm, am I anymore? I'm no longer this asshole. I'm just, everybody's a part of it now. And it's just like, it's no longer fun for him. I thought this was such a clever way to deal with this, which is just like, hey, the world is run by Eric Cartmans now. How much does this suck? And how much does it suck for a character like Eric Cartman? And it's just like, oh, I'm no longer getting the reaction I want to get. I'm no longer getting that attention because it's just so normalized now. I thought that was pretty poignant in itself as well. I loved how they did it. I thought this was a pretty shocking act of political satire, same way that The Great Dictator was 100 years ago, same way Dr. Strangelove is, same way Blazing Saddles is. Matt Stone, Trey Parker, South Park has echoed those, and it has etched in stone that they belong in that same conversation from season 1 to season 27. It shows that they are the comedic geniuses that we've all known they are. And this is another reminder of just like, oh, even through some of the lull, they still have their fastball. And that's impressive for 27 seasons in. So I can't wait to see next week's South Park. Again, as a huge fan of the show my whole life, just excited to see what comes next. So thank you to everyone who watched this discussion on this week's episode of South Park. And also subscribe to this channel. Tomorrow I'll be having a review for Fantastic Four First Steps on this channel. So make sure to subscribe for more.